Yo, just want to give my current analysis on the crypto market's price action coming into our first hour into New York Open. We got some models developing. I just want to speak through my thought process because that can help me to better really lay out my scenarios and stuff. So just hopping on here, speaking them out loud, going over my pre-plan and that kind of thing, right? So currently on Bitcoin, we came into a pretty key demand zone. We came deep into the POI, and then we got a move up, creating an individual low. This is not a naked low because it didn't front run a liquidity point, but it is a low that could be revisited if price intends to create a better pivot with a better bottoming structure on the higher time frame. So we could see that low get revisited, but it did come into a fairly significant POI, so it may not need to get revisited. It doesn't have that same magnetic pull as a naked low. And then we got a fairly decent move away from that low. I think about 20% in total, where you had some structured moves up, and then before this range formation, we had a distribution model, which just gives good confluence into the higher time frame range formation. From there, we created a Model 2 distribution, which had a pretty low quality third tap that was very narrow and very low compared to that deviation of tap 1. So just a very low, very narrow tap 2 with, as you can see, a lot of liquidity built on that breaker structure. Not the strongest looking, most convincing looking closes below the market structure low there. Just just a mediocre breaker structure. So fairly mediocre overall model, although it did have a very good return to zone here with some demand in the lower section of the range. And as you can see, price came down, leaving lots of buy side liquidity, front running the liquidity point at first, and then coming down, sweeping the liquidity point on this New York session, tapping into that demand. So we can now look at this as a potential accumulation within this distribution, where this accumulation can play out and create a higher time frame range, for example, create another market structure continuation to the upside prior to a higher time frame range. A couple scenarios like that could happen. So currently watching this accumulation here, this isn't, of course you could say is counter context due to the fact that you have a distribution here already. But if we view the volume profile, you can see how we're coming down, deviating that volume area low, accumulating with buy side liquidity above, tapping into demand. So just following range theory, price oscillates from volume area high to volume area low. So you get that move to deviate the volume area high, you come down, you deviate the volume area low, you could see a rotation back up to that volume area high. What is that going to provide? Is it going to provide maybe a third tap for a Model 1? That could even be the case. Maybe you'll come down and then you'll create a Model 1 here. On Bitcoin, we have 1, 2, and a 3, and this just ends up being TCT creating TCT. There's a couple scenarios that can happen if this accumulation is intended to play out. We could just see shit V-shape up from here and not come down for a third tap. But yeah, that's the current scenario we are monitoring. Price can also continue down, sweeping this low prior to getting the reversal. But now I wouldn't really necessarily expect a full move down directly to here. Although it could happen, and you could leave this liquidity intact for the higher time frame accumulation. So this links to target back up for, when you're coming down to the technical target of a distribution this slowly, it doesn't necessarily look as good. Usually what would happen is you'd have a distribution that would have, some supply creations, that those supply creations would get mitigated on that move down, and then that ends up creating some primary highs that, once you come all the way down, now that just becomes liquidity. But on the way down, there's just supply mitigations. Here, it's just you're creating a straight liquidity. Getting a fairly aggressive move out of that low. Checking a few of the different pairs we're monitoring. So yeah, those are the scenarios I'm watching for on Bitcoin. coming up from here is going to create the best opportunities, because the further we move away from this low, the better shorts back down become to look. Because currently, we've had some relief, but we could always see some more relief. Also because there is a lot of, liquidity above us. Moves into that liquidity are going to create the best opportunities, but it's not necessary to get that. Yep. From a third tap POI perspective, we don't have the greatest third tap POI. Of course, the Model 1 could be nice since this low is not the highest quality. And yeah, I mean, as you can see, this is your 1 minute extreme liquidity right here. There's another low below it that, could definitely get swept. But I would just mark out the extreme liquidity here. Keep my highlight there. Don't need 2 alerts here. And yeah, we have a very, very similar development on USDT dominance, where we had the distribution or the accumulation. This accumulation actually looked a bit cleaner, due to the fact that you did deviate that tap 1. So although you had the more narrow tap, it did deviate tap 1. And to me, that just always looks a bit cleaner. Although you did not come into a third tap POI, apart from just sweeping extreme liquidity here, which you can just mark out like this. You swept extreme liquidity, but there wasn't really a clear third tap POI apart from this 3 minute pivot OB that isn't even a bearish candle, but you can still use this since it's a pivot order block, and that got front ran. And then so we now have the very similar range on USDT here. You didn't tap into this demand above, so that could be reasons for USDT and Bitcoin to come for a Model 1. Although you did come into this POI. So you came into here like this, but you did not come into this one. So there's still some more supply above you. That price could come for. From a contextual perspective, USDT got this move up, sweeping a lot of liquidity, but also front running 2 liquidity points. You could look at this more from a naked low perspective, due to the fact that there is some high probability, some clean liquidity POIs directly above that point. But you did sweep a lot of liquidity, so you could get a more extended move away before coming for the rest of that macro liquidity. You might even want to create an entire distribution range coming into that liquidity. That could be the bear market low on Bitcoin, for example. But yeah, just observing this local range. Also not the best looking low, a bit better than Bitcoin's because you actually re-swept the low and then got to break a structure back inside, whereas Bitcoin, if you remember, we front ran this low locally here. So that's a much worse low than on USDT, but on USDT, the candle closes weren't the greatest looking. So that could definitely get swept. And then, yeah, so this definitely has a better POI for the Model 2 and for the Model 1. So we can definitely trade this in confluence with Bitcoin. If we get a high probability confirmation on USDT, you could take that trade on Bitcoin, even if Bitcoin isn't looking perfect just yet. But, getting into the altcoins, ETH, first off, doesn't really have a whole lot going on here for it locally. apart from just this local New York Open push down local liquidity sweep that's seen some relief. But yeah, overall ETH is just in a range internally between this kind of weird, like glitchy candle right here, just internally ranging between these 2 points. So nothing too interesting to see there on ETH. But if we come over to SUI here, SUI has a decent development, because if we look on the left, SUI doesn't really have anything in this wick, no POIs that we just came into, no significant POI. We've just been coming down fairly aggressively. Yes, there's buy side liquidity above. So SUI didn't necessarily come into anything too significant there. So this low is just, it's also just an individual low, I would call it, since it didn't front run a liquidity point necessarily, other than like the main low of that wick, which still has a ways off to go. We're kind of in nothing. So I'm just kind of treating the price action here on SUI. Look at the context of it locally. And locally, we got to move up here. And then we've been getting a very slow extended move to the downside, which creates that semi-pro environment. And here we have a demand zone that we came into. It's not your extreme demand of this move. That would be located down here. You can view this demand on the lower time frame. See, this is the unmitigated region of it that we actually front ran and then tapped into on that deviation, which is looking pretty nice. And we got great buy side liquidity locally and within the range. Great buy side liquidity all around above it. So yeah, looking at this volume profile, you can see that the POC and the volume area low are located in that lower section of the range, which is pretty nice because, you know, that means price has spent a lot of time below here. So if you can see, you know, price deviate that volume area low, you know, it should be a fairly easy rotation, at least back up, you know, to the higher areas of this volume node. As you can see how price, you know, deviated the low here, got the rotation back up, you know, we deviate the low again, get a breaker structure. You know, that could be, you know, of course you're not just gonna, you know, range here forever. Eventually you're gonna have to either, you know, break to the upside or break to the downside. You could potentially come down for a Model 1 or a Model 2. We have a decent Model 2 POI locally here where we tapped into that demand and we broke structure, putting in a higher low with some nice wicks that we could look at as our extreme liquidity. Within this demand zone, this is kind of like the start of that unmitigated region. So I just want to see whether or not, you know, the full unmitigated part got filled. And that is a yes. So it creates, like, you know, not necessarily a reason for a Model 1. So we can't have confidence trading the Model 2 and not, you know, not with the room for error of price potentially coming for a Model 1, although it still could. And if it does, you know, that's fine. You know, we just get a slightly deeper mitigation of this demand zone. That's all. So that's fine. Either one is going to be a trade in confluence with Bitcoin here. Bitcoin doesn't necessarily have to be in that third type POI. Just the price action on SUI alone, and, you know, the potential of a local pivot on Bitcoin, can already be enough to enter a position, because what we do is we have technically, so this is where I guess, like, you know, when we're deciding the context here, you know, of course there's so many different scenarios, so it's hard to, you know, have it be completely perfect what you call every context, because the market's always different. But if we look at what we have right now, we tapped into a pretty significant point. We got to move away. We got a low quality distribution that left a lot of liquidity above, and now we're seeing some accumulative price behavior in the demand, you know, the sweeping the volume area low of this distributive range. So, you know, it wouldn't be crazy to see a rotation back up coming for all that buy side liquidity, although it is technically a counter environment due to the confirmed distribution. So that's going to be a context on the major. It's kind of like, you could call it like that B context, where, you know, you're counter on the major, but locally you are creating a good pivot. So, you know, if you want to trade an altcoin, you need a semi-pro environment, at least on the altcoin, which we have. And then you want to see your major creating a good local pivot, which is locally the case, especially if you confirm a model here. And you want to get a refined entry that can easily be de-risked, and you want, you know, the high quality model on your altcoin. So that's what we're looking at there. So I can just throw my checklist up here and just kind of, you know, jot that down just to have it off the top of my head when I do see, you know, confirmation coming. So this is semi-pro. This is a counter, but leaving lots of liquidity above and creating a good pivot in range discount of mediocre confirmed distribution. That's what we will mention. So technically it's a B context. Semi-pro here, where we have that extended move away from the high, coming into demand with lots of local liquidity above. Also that weekend liquidity, this is all weekend liquidity that was generated, you know, starting on Friday all the way here till, you know, the end of Sunday. And then this built up on Monday, where we have that Asia pushing us down, New York pushing us down. So for the timing, we can look at that as a daily range. It's pretty clean. Context on BTC, so look for refined entry. And we can look at this range duration. It is a day and 5 hours, so that meets the minimum requirements. So it's nice that we have a range that is a day and 5 hours, and it also has our daily range liquidity buildup. That's really clean right there. And we also have the weekend liquidity above it. So yeah, I'm definitely interested in this trade in SUI. On, you know, from a similar perspective, we have Algo here, where Algo actually swept a very significant liquidity point. As you can see, it swept this macro range low that was put in 23. Swept that low right there, got to move away, and then now we're seeing that extended move to the downside, building up, you know, similar price action to SUI, where we're building up that weekend liquidity. We're getting that extended move to the downside. That's, you know, kind of like a slow move coming into this demand POI here. And technically on Algo here, we're kind of like creating a nice bottoming formation. I wonder if we have like some kind of bars going on here. Could be on the 5-day or the weekly. Could be on the weekly for sure. Say we get some relief up right here and this candle closes nice and bullish. That could be a nice bottoming formation that, you know, when you zoom in, you can see how we have a 1, 2, 3 right here for that bottoming formation. So that can be nice. And you wouldn't really want to see this come too much lower, you know, if you're intended to put in your bottoming formation in that fashion. So that's a decent location, you know, relative to that. And then we'll come into this demand POI. We do have a more refined level of demand locally inside of here, so I can just mark that out. But we are already coming into that upper section of the demand POI, so you don't necessarily need to come for the refined region. Just looking at this. This is technically that we wick it? Yeah, we wicked this. Yeah. Okay. So if you start seeing closes below here, we could definitely see a rotation down to this POI at least. So we can watch out for that. And then this model on Algo, I think, has been building up for the same duration as the model on SUI. Day and 5 hours exactly. There we go. Technically, this model is already a confirmed model 1 because we came down, we swept the low again, sweeping the liquidity of that demand block on your New York Open, and then we got the confirmation. So New York opened, pushed down, creating a supply POI that we can label as manipulation since it occurred right on that New York Open, you know, just like what, 6 minutes in. And then we got the confirmation about 30 minutes in, and now we're slow grinding up, seeing some, you know, local, maybe distributive price behavior that, you know, ideally, you know, preferably for an entry, will push price down into this extreme liquidity, or even, you know, sweeping the main low again, that we can, you know, then look at on the higher time frame as this just being one move down, this all just being one move down, and then we come up and then we create, you know, model 1 on the higher time frame. So you have a low time frame model 1 going over into the high time frame model 1. Those are 2 scenarios that we can watch, so, you know, set my alerts accordingly on that extreme liquidity and the sweep of the main low. Can even front run them slightly just to be notified a bit more in advance. It's lagging a bit, but keep pushing. So yeah, so Algo's also looking very nice. Overall same development as SUI. So, you know, like this context and stuff that I marked out on SUI, everything is exactly the same as this. I'm just gonna copy and paste this over. Just for, you know, if I take this trade and I journal it, I'll have this information that I can look back on, and I can put this into my journal just to make it easy on myself when I'm journaling the context and all those, that I already had it. And also in the moment, you know, say Asia is opening or whatever, I'm getting home from the gym, I can just hop on the charts, you know, kind of just like glance over what's going on, remind myself everything that I already wrote down, that kind of stuff. So it can be nice to already have that all thought out. But yeah, now that New York first hour of manipulation is over, if we get a confirmation, that can, you know, confirm the rotation for the remainder of the session. So yeah, SUI and Algo are my 2, you know, top priorities. We're watching for that. Then we have Aster. So now let's analyze. We got some new information on Aster just while we've been talking. Aster looks like it's getting a break of structure. Aster had literally the opposite price action where New York popped up around that open, and then now in sweeping the high, and then now we're seeing a sell-off that's looking to break structure. So this could potentially be an entry. This is from the other side of the spectrum. Technically, it's in line with Bitcoin, due to the fact that Bitcoin is in a confirmed distribution. So, there's two perspectives you can look at this, is that, you have a range where you got this internal deviation that disappears on the 45-minute right here, or it disappears on the hourly right here. It disappears on the hourly, where you just have price doing this. So if this model Aster were to play out, it'd be kind of from the perspective of Bitcoin coming up into this supply and then just rejecting down. Maybe even on, and you never even know, maybe even Bitcoin wants to come down and create that accumulation, and on this move down, Aster simply completes its model. Although this is a much smaller move down on Bitcoin than this move down on Aster, it can always happen where Aster just, since it has a distribution model on that move down on Bitcoin, it just simply flushes all this liquidity to the downside. But here, so diving into the local price action, we had, just starting on the higher time frame actually, we had the all-time low of this chart get swept, so we are at lows, and we've had an extended move to the downside. So we've been having this extended move to the downside. We swept the all-time low of the perpetual chart, and then we got to move up pretty aggressively, breaking structure with this distribution model. So locally, we are in a semi-pro context because we've gotten this extended move away from the low, although your range starting points are quite aggressive. So, ideally we get something like this that's, a bit more extended. One moment. Good. So ideally we get something like this that's a bit more extended, because you just zoom out and look at the model, and that would look much cleaner, but you don't always get that. But yeah, something like this would look nice, because at the same time you don't have any local higher time frame exhaustion coming into this range. You just have this aggressive move up with some local stuff right there, but on the higher time frame it's just one aggressive move up that broke structure, and then this is your first pull that is creating that range, although you do have this extended move away from the low. So technically it is semi-pro, but it is just a bit of an aggressive move up, and it's nicer to see price start rounding over a bit prior to your entry, prior to getting that. But if we just zoom in on the lower time frame, we can see that we did get a market structure pull of exhaustion, a couple pulls of exhaustion prior, although they were lower time frame. And then we got the move down, and we got a pretty nice return to zone build up going up into this third tap. So yeah, this zone could technically be viewed as manipulation, but let me think here. The other perspective that you can take on this is that this is your pole of exhaustion, and then this right here is your distribution locally there, where we could then just create something simply like this that can then easily get that rotation at least down to this low even while Bitcoin is rejecting from the supply and coming down to its POI. And then that's a much more reasonable move where Bitcoin goes down 1.28%, and from there pump fund retraces 5%. Following the local distribution model, or Aster, I mean, not pump fund. So that could be the case there. Gonna, set an alert here in case this ends up being the extreme liquidity. Keeping that scenario in mind. Can mark it out like this. From the perspective of getting an entry right here, 4.5 RR. I've it's a clean model for sure. Just on its own, it's a pretty clean model. The room for error that you have right there isn't ideal. Getting some sort of a level 2 breaker structure coming out of there would definitely be nice, especially given the fact that this could be its own local model here. And that would make it into like a model 1 going over into a model 2. And that would also just kind of like extend out that rounding over top where you really, solidify this level 1 break, and then you show that this demand zone is out of the way, mitigated before you get another break. Because to me, could also be a nice hedge, if we potentially get a position on SUI, say, on a break right here. Come down, break structure, and upon that break of structure, maybe SUI's, moving up, and then you get that level 2 break on Aster, and you just enter Aster, and then you are short and long simultaneously. SUI pulling back with a lot of liquidity, which is, exactly what you want to see there. Although it is a bit more narrow. If the return to zone can build all the way to that breaker structure level, it can be more narrow. Bitcoin's still a bit higher. Algo, even if Algo is a bit more narrow, it looks better just due to the fact that you already technically have a model 1 here going into a model 2. So, just looking at Aster from a model perspective, I'm going to run through the checklist on Aster. Color context semi-pro, extended, move from the low or the just aggressively broke market structure, bullish and near and the return to zone is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's very clean. I think it has the same range duration as Bitcoin. I'll say 2 days. Tap displacement is solid. This is solid. Yeah, that's nice. Getting that confirmation 1 hour into the New York session with the demand POI created on that New York Open, so you could definitely call that manipulation. Confirmation 1 hour into New York Open with trap zone created on New York Open. The room for error on this model would be that trap zone BTC locally accumulating. And the confluence we would say is pro. BTC in confirmed distribution, although it is showing weakness and exhaustion and accumulative price behavior coming into the extreme liquidity, extreme demand. And now we're getting a break of structure here. Could even just use this right here. See, main market structure that just got broken. Pretty good aggressiveness and price displacement there. And as you can see from the high, Bitcoin moved down, currently 0.61%, while Aster moved down, currently 2.16%. Yeah. So yeah, you can see that, this could at least get, completion to here at minimum easily by the time Bitcoin just comes to this POI. So yeah, really preferably I would want to see just a level 2 break of structure coming out of this. Just like this. It doesn't even have to sweep the extreme liquidity. That's just going to allow for me to have a more refined entry. But technically this can be considered a fake demand. Okay. So I think it's pretty clear what I'll need to see to enter here on Aster. It's just a level 2. Level 2 break structure, and that's an entry there. So we front running. It's POI. Getting a move up. Getting move up here is not the worst thing, because even if he sweeps some of this liquidity, it's fine. It just creates more displacement for a nice potential third tap. More ranging behavior, more acceptance after that deviation. And then, oh shit, I don't even think my alert went off on this. That's whack. What's my market structure? Is that it? No, that's internal. It's this. We could even just call it this, just because. Did my alert go off on that? Or maybe I was just locked in on this video. And then there's another trade I'm watching right here on GBP NZD. Not sure if we're coming into a POI. Nothing too high time frame if there is anything. We are seeing some nice exhaustion that could provide a local move up that's been getting very extended to the downside. So you gotta be aware of that higher time frame 2 hour order block. But if you zoom in, this is just liquidity on that move down. Nothing too significant right here, but I will be aware of it. Yeah, these other pairs popping up while Aster is definitely showing signs of weakness relative. But yeah, I think everything is clear. Watching for a break of structure here, just a clear aggressive break there, and that can be an entry. And then potentially keeping my stop loss above this main low, but we're gonna see how convincing it is. This can be a situation where if you come up super slowly, it makes a fake break more likely. Also, the fact that you have this. But if it's just a super aggressive, I won't really care about that. Pretty clean overall development. I think we're a few days in duration. Yep, 6 days, 19 hours. Context be counter, high time frame, semi-pro locally. Range duration is 6 days, 19 hours. Okay. That's all for this video. Ended up being quite long, 45 minutes down. Well, hope you guys enjoyed. I'm gonna be uploading this one pretty quickly, just because it's more of like urgent of price action, unless I want to just upload as like a thought process, analysis, kind of like a journal. But yeah, appreciate you guys for watching.